The world of One Piece is cyclical by design, just like the ancient symbol the Ouroboros, a symbol depicting a serpent eating its own tail, a symbol representing the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, an Egyptian concept of the eternal cycle of the universe. Hello, Cursorland here. Welcome to Dragon Peace. In this video, I'd like to dive deep into dragons and snakes. I'll also break down how Emu is actually a dragon and the Hinoki's man. Along the way, I'll talk about Hawky Pants, devils, and even our buddies of the Kamabaka Kingdom. Hee-haw! By the way, big shout out to everyone who watched my last video about the Emerald City. We managed to skyrocket past the first milestone of 500 subs with that video, so thank you. Now, here's the ask. I now need 1k subs by November 2024, otherwise my views from my first Mega Theory video are going to expire. So, sub now, think later, and you'll be helping me out big time. Now let's fluff and go. Dragons and snakes hold a special place in Oda's heart. Toriyama-san says Dragon Ball and Dragon Quest has really done a number on this poor man. Even from a young age, our favorite fishman has been transfixed on dragons, and the world of One Piece is filled to the rim with both dragons and serpents. In this pirate adventure, dragons are coiled together with snakes, and their roles in the story are often either interchangeable or one of opposites. But let's go over some examples of these creatures in One Piece to demonstrate how obsessed Oda really is with these slithering beasts. Oda, for instance, gives us Worm, Drake, Hydra, and Long, meaning or referring to dragons in various cultures. Satori's Tamadoragon attack, meaning ball dragon or Dragon Ball if you like. And when you abbreviate Doragon, since Japanese people absolutely love to abbreviate words, we get Dora. So, Sandora, Shandora, and Doramu. Then we have the Japanese word for dragon, written in kanji which reads as Ryu, Shiryu, Ryunosuke, Ryuboshi, Ryuma, Sabo's Ryusouken, King's Karyudon, the Ryuryu fruit series that all seems to be dinosaurs or Kyoryu in Japanese, and last and absolutely the least, the despicable Tenryubito, the celestial dragons. Tatsu, another reading for Ryu as in Zoro's Tatsumaki, literally meaning dragon roll, the Japanese word for tornadoes. The Hawkeye will have realized that other tornadoes in the story may also then tie into dragons. But wait, there is more, because you see, eastern dragons are often associated with water and rain, believed to control weather and water bodies. This ties into sea currents written like this, which is read as Kairyu, Ryu, this time meaning current rather than dragon. But Oda, the pun fiend, of course uses this as an opportunity to do what he always does. It's also the same kanji used for Santo Ryu, the three-sword style, and Sanji who calls himself an Ichiryu no Kokku, meaning first-rate cook. But back to tornadoes. A quote-unquote tornado underwater is a whirlpool, right? And so we have the Yuta Kairyu, the serpent currents, and the White Strum, literally meaning white dragon. All of these spirals tying into water makes sense now, right? Dragons tying into the Ouroboros and the cyclical nature of whirlpools, tornadoes, and the ocean currents of the One Piece world. Spirals are what makes this world tick. And I guess I could go on and on with all the other references to dragons in Oda's world building, but let's stop here. After all, we can't forget about the snakes. Although snakes can often represent chaos and eternity in numerous cultures, the King Cobra specifically can represent royalty and divinity in Egypt. I mean, come on, Cobra as in King fucking Cobra? Interesting also, since the symbol of Alabasta, as I mentioned in the past, is the sun, a great big ball of fire. There's also Bo Marigold, who ate the King Cobra fruit and has an attack called the Hebigamitsuki Salamander, which translates to Flame Snake God here. And there's also Luffy's Gomu Gomu no King Cobra, which manifests itself as a flaming snake. And do I need to bother mentioning the Quetzalcoatl, the inspiration for Kashigami? Kashigami, if I had to guess, could mean Fire Snake God. So there's a connection between fire, the sun, and the snake. Look, and I know all I've done so far is to ramble on about times Oda used dragons and snakes in the story, but if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to illustrate their importance or claim that the final boss of One Piece, Emu, will also be a dragon, right? One Piece Volume 1. Luffy stands atop a dragon and stabs himself. We flick through to see the Lord of the Coast, a serpentine sea king with his red eyes, who takes a cheeky nibble out of red hair Shanks. In hindsight, we now know that this serpent took a bite out of a celestial dragon. So, a serpent versus a dragon. The scene ends with a zoom out of Luffy wailing, his cries echoing out in a spiral. We say farewell to Shanks, and Luffy receives the iconic straw hat with the red band, which parallels the Ouroboros and the Red Line, a great wall coiling itself around the One Piece world, and which Dory and Broggy calls the serpent soaked in blood. 10 years on, and Luffy sets sail on his own adventure, and who does he encounter? The Lord of the Coast. The first ever enemy that Luffy defeats on his journey was a serpent. Then what happens a few pages later? Luffy gets sucked into a whirlpool. Subscribers of the channel also likely notice the significance of the emu and the Goat Island here. But Luffy's very first enemy was the Lord of the Coast. How fitting will it be if Luffy's final enemy is Emu, who ends up being a snake or a dragon? How perfect would such a cyclic adventure be? It's also not the last time in the story that we see snakes and dragons facing off. The Luffy and Yamato versus Kaido battle, Cobra offed by Emu, and Sabo of the Dragon Claw style, and the claw of a dragon burnt onto the back of the Snake Princess. We've already had Luffy's King Kong gun, which evolved into Bajrang gun, the monkey god gun. So it wouldn't be surprising if Luffy's Gomu Gomu no King Cobra evolved into a godly snake to defeat Emu, right? In alchemy, the Ouroboros is sometimes depicted as evolving into a dragon. This symbolizes enlightenment, the idea of achieving a higher state of existence through inner change. Even in Chinese and Japanese mythology, dragons often evolve from a snake or a fish. Oda's avatar being a fish makes total sense now, right? Oda, who idolizes Toriyama Sensei, the creator of Dragon Ball and Dragon Quest, trying to manifest himself into a dragon also. So, what if Emu and Joy Boy were both associated with snake symbolism in some way, like the citizens of Amazon Lily or the Snake Neck tribe? But one day during the Void Century, Emu gained an ability that metaphorically or literally transcended him from a snake to a dragon. It could even be as simple as gaining wings or a flight ability, which, I mean, come on, dragons are basically just that, right? Snakes that evolved to fly and grew limbs. The idea of snakes evolving into dragons would also tie into Oda's note in Volume 12, stating that the future evolution of humans is flight, or his note in Volume 39 talking about how birds are able to fly freely, and rambling on about the logistics of human flight. Even Vegapunk claims that seraphims are the peak of humanity. And I'll wager this, since Luffy is likely the white snake representing the sun, day and fire, and we also have Shiro or white being the kanji used for Luffy's Dawn Attack series, and also represented by his white Nika form. And so, Emu then must be a black dragon representing the ocean, night and shadows. Which makes sense, right? After all, a great big light, like the sun god Nika, will create a great big shadow like Emu, the yin and yang, opposing and equal forces. Since after all, Emu is I am you, as in Joy Boy, I am you. Thriller Bark is Oda's peak foreshadowing, pun intended. We even had the bit with Habu Port, meaning Snake Port, becoming Tokage Port, meaning Lizard Port. There's actually a hidden message here, since Habu Port is located in Hakumai, with Haku meaning white, and Tokage Port with the Kage written as a kanji for shadow. So a white snake turns into a shadow lizard in an arc that's all about dragons. Speaking of shadow lizards, the Japanese word for moonlight is gekko, which Oda uses as a wordplay for the English word for geckos. This is evident with Gekko Moria, seen with his Tsuno Tokage attack. Tokage, as I already mentioned, is lizard. Luffy's home country, the Goa Kingdom. Goa in our world being home to many snake species including king cobras. And since Goa Kingdom is part of Dawn Island, we have the Sun Snake. Our Lord and Savior Usopp, on the other hand, was born and raised in Syrup Village, which is a part of the Gecko Islands. So, Night Lizard. And Usopp himself, his spirit animal is a chameleon, and we even get this flashback of Usopp chasing a lizard which he calls a dragon. And dragons are godly creatures, right? Well, God Usopp. By the way, random thought, but Usopp was born in Syrup Village, right? Syrup in Japanese is actually Shiropu, and Shiro means white or lie, depending on the kanji. So, Usopp, Yasop, Shirop. Was Usopp's ancestor the founder of Syrup Village? Now back to Imu being the red eyes black dragon, the ocean opposing the sun. Surely I don't need to mention that Imu in reverse is Umi, the ocean in Japanese, right? You'll have to watch the Emerald City video for more context on the symbols of the ocean versus the sun. But there's a major dragon god in Japanese mythology called Ryujin, written like this, literally meaning dragon god, and I believe Oda will reference this god for Imu's abilities and traits. And yes, it's another Dragon Ball fanboy moment for Oda since Shenron is written like this, so simply flipped. That's such an Oda play too, to make the final boss an homage to Shenron. Ryujin in mythologies was the god of the sea, the ruler of the ocean who lived in his palace, the Ryugujo. Yeah, that one. So, potentially an ancient ancestor of Oda's fish people, Ryujin was known to have dominion over all sea creatures and had two magical gems known as the Kanju and the Manju, also known as the Tide Jewels. Ryujin was known to be able to control the ebb and flow, and even control sea levels. Now, if Imu's ability comes from a devil fruit, I'd say that Imu has a mythical Zoan, the Uo no Mi model Ryujin. This would be interesting to see on multiple levels, since we see Luffy visiting a fish shop in Chapter 1, simply titled Uo, meaning fish. And because Uo backwards is O, meaning king, and also because it would add salt to the wound that the figure who has been oppressing the merfolk and the fishmen all this time, preventing them from reaching the sun and labeling them as the most sought after for slavery, is the same figure who uses the ability of their god and ancestor, the Ryujin. It also ties into how Oda explained to us in an SBS that there are superior versions of some of the devil fruits, like with the Mana versus the Magomago or the Yuki versus the Hiehie. So what about a superior fruit to Kaido's Seiryu fruit? The final fight of Wano, when Luffy acquired the Nika form and also died for the first time, would parallel well with if Imu caused Joyboy's death. Now, if there's anyone who doesn't think Luffy, Joyboy, and Nika will be a snake god, I mean, come on. The Shandians, an ancient civilization who worship a literal giant snake and call it a sun god amongst other epithets? But anyway, besides everything I've already mentioned, there's also the two most likely candidates of Luffy's future romantic interest, Hancock and Vivi, both tying into snakes. Wait, romance? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sure some of you want to be left to discuss power scaling in peace. I mean, come on. One Piece is a battle manga, not a frickin' fairy tale like those bloody Disney movies, right? Well, actually, I'd be willing to bet that stories like Peter Pan, Beauty and the Beast, and Sleeping Beauty will be referenced in gigantic ways very soon. There's even this comment from Oda all the way back in volume 13. A dragon lives at Enoshima, a mythical beast closest to being a god. That is a dragon. I wonder what a dragon would taste like. Right? Oh, you need context. Alright. Well, if I'm right about dragons being one of the key elements of the endgame, this cryptic message from Oda is actually significant. You see, Enoshima is a real island in Japan with a curious story. Long ago, a terrible 5-headed dragon is said to have plagued the area. Aware of the people's suffering, Benzaiten, the goddess of everything that flows, including water, time, music, art, and knowledge, raised the island from the bottom of the bay to serve as her abode. The dragon fell in love with this goddess, but Benzaiten straight up rejected him on account of him being a prick. Also important to note is that Benzaiten is often associated with a white snake, considered to be her sacred creature and messenger. If the Void Century centered around a love triangle between Joyboy, Lily, and Imu, the puzzle pieces feel like they start to fit. After all, One Piece is Romance Dawn. And just like Oda said, dragons are beasts closest to being a god. Imu, the celestial dragon, being a literal dragon sitting at the top of the world as a god, and the katakana for Nerona can be turned into the kanji for god, so it's pretty damn obvious, innit? Imu and Joyboy would also obviously tie into the Ragnarok snake, Jormungandr. I won't go into details, but this mythological serpent, like the Ouroboros, also tie into the cyclical nature of the world and rebirth. Even in Egyptian mythology, we have the giant serpent/dragon, Apep, the Lord of Chaos, also known as the ultimate enemy of the sun god Ra. A fun little caveat is that in some texts, Apep is said to stretch out to 16 yards in length. 16, as I've mentioned in the past, is the Goroase for Emu. Speaking of Goroase, in the Chinese zodiac, the snake is the 5th animal and the dragon is the 6th, so 5 and 6. Hopefully everyone by now knows to read that as Gomu, but although 1-6 can be read as Emu, 5-6 can also be read as Emu. So both Luffy and Emu could be tied to snakes and dragons through the Chinese zodiac also. Now, can we talk about Smiley for a moment? Yes, that's Smiley, the slime monster with the Sala Sala Devil Fruit, model Axolotl. The Sala is derived from salamander, which salamanders actually pop up here and there in the story. Like Natsu Dragonail from Fairy Tail, who has the epithet of salamander, Oda also links salamander to dragons and snakes, like the Salamander, a ship of the Gaspard pirates, and Boa Marigold's attack, Hebigamitsuki Salamander. So Smiley the dragon appears in an arc with 2 other dragons who were also the product of science. But the question is, why did Oda choose the model of the fruit to be an axolotl? Well, for one thing, this fruit is super rare since it's one of the very few aquatic zoans introduced into the story, which would fit well with if Emu has the ability of Ryujin, the ocean god. For another, the axolotl is named after the major Aztec deity, Xolotl, the twin brother to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. So again, the idea of a dragon and serpent, and the whole Emu being a brother to Joy Boy thing is something I already discussed in my Christmas piece video, so another parallel. And Smiley is a slime, right? Well, slimes have always been a mascot for Dragon Quest, which as you know by now is one of Oda's favorite games. But here's the kicker, Smiley is a slime, as in slime. Suda Emu. The answer was here all along. Are you starting to see the vision now? The war during the Void Century was between Joy Boy the Snake God and Emu the Transcendent Dragon God. The losing side, Joy Boy the Snake and his people were labeled as devils. The winning side, Emu the Dragon and the Celestial Dragons, became the gods of the world. But let's make this theory a little bit spicier. The Gorosei, who despite their godly status, have battle scars. So now, wouldn't it be interesting if Emu also had battle scars? Namely, a scar across his face. A scar from Joy Boy of the Sun. A burn scar. Hinokizu, whose name literally means burn scar. In chapter 1056, which by the way, 5-6, we find out that the final road poneglyph is held by Hinokizu. This is told to us in a conversation between Killer and Captain Useful Kid. Are you saying to look for the burn scar man? But we've got no leads. Later in chapter 1081, we learn more about Hinokizu through a conversation between Kuzan and the Blackbeard pirates. We get further confirmation that Hinokizu is a man, that he owns a ship that is pitch black, and that enemy ships getting close to this black ship are rumored to get swallowed up by a giant whirlpool, which may be the work of an ability user. Shiryu adds to the headcanon by suggesting that Hinokizu may be from the world government, and that it wouldn't surprise him if they held onto one of the road poneglyphs themselves to prevent pirates from reaching the One Piece. We also know that the final road poneglyph was originally located at Fishman Island during Roger's era. Burn scar, pitch black ship, whirlpool, and a part of the world government to prevent pirates from reaching the One Piece? These clues all point to Emu perfectly. I mean, I've already explained how Eastern dragons and Ryujin, the dragon god, can control bodies of water, so being able to create giant whirlpools wouldn't be a shocker. And if it's a world government that holds the final road poneglyph, originally found on Fishman Island, who better to protect it than Emu, the final boss, who may have the abilities of Ryujin? And the clues about the burn scar and the pitch black ship? Well, let's start with the burn scar. Emu, Mu meaning void. Dragons in Buddhism link to the concept of voidness known as shunyata, or Ku meaning sky in Japanese as in Kuhaku no Hyakunen, the void century. Shunyata is commonly illustrated as a circular brushstroke like the Ouroboros. Dragons are seen as beings that can transform shape and appearance, illustrating the fluid and ever-changing nature of reality. The concept of void is reflected in Emu's general demeanor. He shows no emotions, as if he is completely void of them. Even his shadowy silhouette gives very little away, and yet, the one time he loses his composure is in the presence of King Cobra and Sabo, who appear out of nowhere and attacks Emu with a flame attack, which Emu consumes whole with his giant mouth. Just look at those teeth, eyes and tail and tell me you don't see a dragon. But what triggered Emu for the first and only time was a flame attack. This is the clue that Emu has a history of flames, and that he in fact is Hinokizu. let's also not forget that the person who attacked Imu here is Sabo, a man associated with dragons with a scar across his face as well. A scar which, if you've forgotten, was given to him by a celestial dragon who blew up his ship, a literal burn scar. So, Sabo parallels Imu. Considering that Sabo could have become the king of Goa Kingdom had things played out differently, it makes you wonder if Imu founded this country, whose residents include some absolute goats. This also connects into my mega theory that Imu and Joy Boy had a third brother, but there are more than enough clues here of Imu having a burn scar already. Then the clue about Hinokizu riding on a pitch black ship? You may be like, Imu doesn't ride on a ship, and he certainly doesn't leave Marijoa, but this is a pirate story. Would it be that surprising? You think just because we haven't seen him leave Marijoa, it means that he can't? The Blackbeard crew, with their own fleet of black ships, describe the Hinokizu ship not merely as black, but makuro, meaning pitch black. Now hold that thought. Black ships, or rather kurofune, refers to the historical arrival of the foreign ships in Japan, led by Commodore Matthew Perry in 1853. This event marked Japan's forceful opening to international trade after over 2 centuries of isolationism. This arrival of the black ships was the beginning of a great set of changes that would become the modernization and westernization of Japan. A little more on this later. But it's perfectly fitting that Hinokizu's ship is described as pitch black, since the reason these trade ships were described as being black was because these ships had their hulls painted black with a viscoelastic polymer called pitch, which is where the term pitch black actually comes from. Was Oda intentional and aware of the origins of this English word? No idea, but how fitting, yeah? And a pitch black ship would be perfect for Imu, the shadow dragon, since the Nero of House Nerona means black in Italian. As for the black ships who will invade the Wano country, who also have their borders closed, one would assume that the Blackbeard pirates would fit the bill here, right? Perhaps they will come to claim Pluton soon, which would fit pretty well with my Pokemon theory too, if Blackbeard is linked to Pluton through Hades. But what does black represent in One Piece? Black, or rather kuro in Japanese, as Miss Golden Week stated, is the color of betrayal. Oda has been very consistent with this rule for kuro, as seen with Captain Kuro, Kuroko Dairu, the Kurozumi family, and Blackbeard aka Kurohige. These people have all betrayed their people in one way or another, but Imu being the #1 character shrouded in actual shadow with black in his name, we can expect him to have betrayed Joy Boy, his own brother, right? Also, before I forget, we get another clue of Imu being a dragon at the start of chapter 1081 when he says, D is the moniker of our ancient enemy. In recent times it has cropped up more frequently, however it is nothing but a faint echo. But in Japanese, the literal translation for the section of text referring to the faint echo is written as nukigara, meaning empty shell or cast off skin, like those of snakes and reptiles. There was zero necessity for Oda to use those specific words in that moment, and yet he did. So now I'm fairly confident after doing the research that Imu is a dragon and the most likely candidate to be the Hinokizu. One thing to remember though is that Whitebeard mentioned that finding the One Piece is what will set into motion the gigantic war and flip the world upside down. But how would that make sense? If the Great War only happens after Luffy and Co find the One Piece, then the correct order of events is obtain the final road poneglyph, find the One Piece, and then the all-out war, meeting Imu for the first time. So we shouldn't be meeting Imu until the war, right? Well, sure, if Oda was a basic bitch storyteller, but it would be far more interesting if the Straw Hats, with the help of some allies, first needed to take the road poneglyph from Imu and then escaped in the nick of time. Oda has already foreshadowed this on Whole Cake Island when they escaped from Big Mom after stealing the road poneglyph print and then later facing off with her properly. So then it just becomes a question of who will come to the Straw Hats' aid to allow them to escape from Imu. And I mean, come on, it's going to be Dragon and the Revolutionary Army, right? Since, as I've said a bunch of times in the past, characters of the same animal epithets will often clash. So then, Luffy can go off to Laugh Town to learn the true history of the world and therefore gaining the context for what's truly at stake and why they need to take down Imu, who they managed to only just get away from. But I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention that Oda has already given us a major clue in the booklet Road to Laugh Town about the location of the final road poneglyph. He tells us that the cube is possibly located at Elbaf, Vera, or Hachinosu. As a betting man, I'd wager that the location of the poneglyph and the encounter with the Hinokizu man will be in the country of Vera, since I'm guessing that this location is actually Imu's villa. I'm not even messing around. This is exactly the kind of wordplay Oda often does with location names. Plus, Vera's government was overthrown by none other than the Revolutionary Army, so another reason for Dragon to be there. The one argument I'm sure most people will have for Imu being Hinokizu is that it would be far more logical for Imu to keep the road poneglyph hidden in the heart of Merijua. But in the same way that we can't predict Luffy or Oda's plans, Imu's actions are also unpredictable like a child's. He revealed himself to Cobra even though the Gorosei warned him against it, and he destroyed a whole island just because it was close. Imu is Hinokizu precisely because we would assume he isn't. Imu ain't worried because he's the supreme god of this world. He does as he pleases. Okay, now let's talk about vampires, devils, and Okama, the other aspects of dragons. So, Dracula Mihawk is another parallel to Imu. Dracula the vampire is derived from the Romanian word Dracul, meaning dragon or devil. Ironically, the first slave of the celestial dragons we ever see in Sabaldi Archipelago was this man, Devil DS. So, Dracul, dragon, devil. That's a lot of D's, Hawky boy. Give me a nod if you're secretly a D. Okay, nothing. So Dracula Mihawk is a dragon, fitting then that he has the same eyes as Imu. His rival is also a dragon, and Mihawk is even the end goal of Zoro, who is the descendant of a dragon slayer. By the way, remember in the Christmas Piece video how I mentioned that the D of the D clan is pronounced as Dor? Well, Ryuma's epithet is Ryuma Dor King. He's literally a D. Food for thought. Stussy in the anime also gets the double eye design and has the black wings and blood. If depictions of vampires in One Piece is a reference to dragons, then Imu the dragon's attack on Lelouch, whose rulers look like vampires, makes a lot of sense. Vampires are creatures of the night, symbolized by the moon, so Gekko as in moonlight and Yoru as in night. Even the empty throne is decorated by stars, and the Gorosei are the 5 elder stars. Even some of the typical tropes of vampire abilities in pop cultures would fit with Imu and the Gorosei, right? Regeneration, hypnosis, and telepathy. Blood drinking could tie into their immortality. Sunlight vulnerability would tie into being the enemy of the sun. And hypnosis, as I've explained in the past, wouldn't be that far-fetched for Imu. I also mentioned in my last video that Imu likely has a long neck based on his silhouette. Well, there's actually a yokai called the Rokurokubi, even referenced in Wano by Rokuro Sensei. This yokai can stretch out their neck like a snake and is also known to drink their victim's blood. Vampires also have shadow manipulation, shape-shifting, and the ability to transform into animals, commonly bats or wolves. This is also demonstrated by Gekko Moriya's name, with Komori meaning bat in the name. His shadow abilities parallels Imu and the Gorosei. Peter Pan, which I briefly mentioned earlier, is also being referenced. Pan as Joy-Boy and his shadow as Imu, I am you. And speaking of Pan, there's Pan, the goat-horned Greek god, who was rebranded by the Christians as the devil. Another goat-like figure also rebranded as the devil was the Baphomet, which, if you remember, the Baphomet represents duality, good and evil, light and dark, male and female. I'll say it again, male and female. Yes, our Okama friends also play into our topic today of dragons. Why? Because Ivankov almost ate Kaido's devil fruit, that's why. Kidding, not kidding. It wasn't just by chance that this almost happened. Eva-chan's tattoo depicts both male and female symbols, which combined creates a devil imagery. These horns being a parallel to Imu and dragons as well. Even in Christianity, dragons are often depicted as an agent of chaos and the devil himself. There's also the snake, commonly interpreted as Satan, who tempted Eve to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, are we in cancellation territory? Is Oda saying that Okama are devils, like the modern depiction of the Baphomet? Au contraire. Eva-chan and their people call themselves the newcomer, meaning new humanity, who goes beyond gender. This concept is much like the evolution of snakes and dragons, the godly figures in my opinion. And in the cover of chapter 537 during the Impel Down arc, the Straw Hats enjoy a hot pot, which is onabe in Japanese. Onabe, however, is also the slang for lesbians. Okama, by the way, literally meaning cooking pot. And the 18 here is Goroase for Eva. And the chapter name is Jigoku ni Okama, and Okama in Hell. Okay, so am I now just contradicting myself? Doesn't that mean that Oda is indeed saying that Okamas are devils? But no, the kanji that Oda actually uses for the word Okama here is the kanji for Buddha, read as Hotoke. And remember, Imu's name written in katakana can be combined to become God, so Eva-chan is connected to devils through his tattoo, but Oda also connects both Imu and Eva to Buddha, a godly figure. And remember, as Oda says, dragons are closest to being a god. We now have a connection to Okama and dragons, and that actually makes a lot of sense. Since a portion of Monkey D. Dragon's revolutionary army are the newcomer, there's also even more credence to Krokodairu of the Kurosugirudo having been a woman at some point, since crocodile is kind of like a dragon. And actually, crocodile in Japanese is written as wani, but wani is also an alternative word for dragons in mythologies. And if we rewind to the start of this video, crocodile's attack, Sabors, is also a tornado as in Tatsumaki, meaning dragon roll. And a final little add-on is that bearded dragons in our world is known to be able to partially change gender. Okama even tie into Kurofune the Black Ships. Did you ever wonder why Oda included transgender themes through Yamato, Okiku, and Izo during the Wano arc? The forced opening of international trade after centuries of isolationism in Japan also brought with it missionaries and the introduction of westernization and modernization. Prior to the opening of their borders, Japan actually had a relatively open attitude towards male and male relationships, especially among samurai and in kabuki theaters, but the Western influence brought stigmatization of homosexuality and new anti-sodomy laws. Speaking of sodomy and homosexuality, Chinese folk stories often had homosexual encounters, specifically with dragons. Apparently, Chinese dragons consistently enjoy sexual relationships with older men. In one story, a 60-year-old farmer is quote-unquote forcibly sodomized by a passing dragon. And now speaking of dragons and sodomy, not a sentence I thought that I'd be saying anytime soon, did you know that historically the term sodomy originates from the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah, cities mentioned in the book of Genesis? The term was used to describe sexual behaviors believed to have been practiced by the inhabitants of these cities. No idea if this was intentional by Oda to connect the sodomizing Chinese dragons to Sodom and Gomorrah, who are also dragons. And yeah, to the naysayers out there shouting that these fellas are king bulls, not dragons, to me, these character designs look like an homage to dragons who appear in one of Oda's favorite books, My Father's Dragon, a series which was incredibly popular in Japan and one that I absolutely adored growing up. But let's swiftly bring it back to the Baphomet and vampires tying into dragons. Impel Down. To impale, a vampire is a creature often impaled by a stake. This hellish prison was run by two dragons, Magellan of Hydra and Shiryu, meaning white dragon, and Magellan with his goat horns and wings, the design of Baphomet. And of course, Ivankov, who we met for the first time in Impel Down, is the queen of the Kamabaka kingdom, the drag queen. Wait, a drag queen? Dragon. Really, Oda? So there you have it. Imu, an ancient soul in the body of a young man which he acquired from obtaining perpetual youth like a vampire or Peter Pan. A dragon of the ocean, the night and the shadows, both a god and a devil, a man and a woman. Imu, the brother of Joy Boy. Imu, who was in love with Lily. Imu, who betrayed Joy Boy only to be betrayed by Lily. Imu is the Hinokiza man, holding the final key to the One Piece and the final enemy to Luffy and his crew. Luffy versus Imu. Imu, who has gained the powers of Ryujin, the ocean god, and able to control bodies of water. He is the natural enemy of devil fruit users, and yet simultaneously, the sun is Imu's natural enemy, for he is its shadow. Luffy the white snake versus Imu the black dragon. They are both each other's natural enemy. Yin and Yang, two opposing forces creating a spiral. Their shared history repeats itself like the cyclic motions of a clock, a wheel, a whirlpool, and the planet. Their destinies are chained and coiled together, Because you see, the world of One Piece is cyclical by design, just like the ancient symbol the Ouroboros, a symbol depicting a serpent eating its own tail, a symbol representing the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, an Egyptian concept of the eternal cycle of the universe. Hello, Cursaland here. Welcome to Dragon Peak. Ah, crap, we've been here before, haven't we? Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me break the cycle and free you from this video. Now comment below with your own theories on who you think the Hinokizuna is. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to sub to the channel to reach our 1K goal. Cursaland out. Peace.